Good evening and welcome to this edition of Conversations with Lothrop. Tonight we are very pleased to be interviewing Peter Goldsmith, who is the Dean of Students at Oberlin College. And we're glad that you could be with us now for this interview.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Mm-hmm. Let me just give a biographical statement. He has his Bachelor of Arts degree from Boston College, majoring in English.
Right.
And you tell me if I'm wrong on some of this.
Right.
Master of Arts from Boston College and major in sociology. PhD from the University of Chicago with a major in anthropology, right?
All correct.
He's worked at the University of Chicago for, I believe it was, what, 3 years?
About 3 years.
3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Assistant Dean of Students in the Division of Social Sciences.
Mm-hmm.
He was at Princeton University for 7 years as Director of Studies for the University Multi-College, is that right?
No, it's Mackey College.
College.
Mackey College is one of Princeton's 5 residential colleges. I was the Director of Studies for one of those.
Are they residential colleges? Do they live
Right,
okay.
Right. The students live there and they eat together there, and there are some number of classes that are offered through. It's somewhat like Harvard's house system or the Yale residential college system.
And then we don't want to leave out Dartmouth, where you were 6 years as Dean of Freshman Studies.
First-year students.
Yeah, also in Dean of Students also?
I was the Dean of First-year Students.
First-year students. That's you wouldn't say freshman, would you? Never say freshman to an Oberlin's person.
It actually was the Dean of Freshman office until about my second or third year, and then we did the right thing and changed it to the first-year office.
Yes, okay. And I'm trying to think whether the term was when Oberlin made that transfer. They started off dropping just the man, and they had fresh person. And that didn't go over very well. It had all kinds of jokes attached to it. So then they went to first year. I guess that's what they're using now.
Yeah. I think there's a British term which is freshers, which I rather liked as well. Although I could never interest people in it at Dartmouth.
I like that rather. Yeah.
Yeah, freshers.
And then we've gone back to sophomore, haven't we? Now
we've always had sophomores. I do believe.
And by the way, I've discovered most college students don't know what sophomore means.
Yeah, I think I have an idea, but why don't you tell me?
It's Greek.
Yes.
He's actually literally wise fool.
Right.
And we get the word sophomoric from him. And you tell them, and usually I don't see them again. They go away sort of sadly. That's it. Oh, I digress. I'm sorry. And then you began your position at Oberlin as Dean of Students on July 1st, 1999.
Correct.
Have I got it? Okay. And I like this statement, and maybe this says it pretty much in a nutshell. Where at Oberlin, he coordinates campus life outside academics.
Yes.
I like that. I like that.
Yeah. That's a pretty wide swath. Yeah.
You've had a very diverse academic experience. And my first question to you is, what attracted you to the academic life?
I grew up in an academic family, and I'm the son of a physics professor. And it just always looked like a great life to me. That my father worked hard. He worked very hard. He worked long hours, but he was able, in large measure, to make his own schedule. And he was always around young people that kept him young. And he seemed to be able to take vacations when he needed to take vacations. And he was always in an environment which kept him intellectually vibrant. So I never had any interest in physics, but I liked that other part of his work, which was being in college environments. I've always found college towns to be the most interesting kinds of places to be living. So I guess you could say it's sort of the family business.
What college did he work for?
He worked for Boston College.
So you grew up in that area, though?
I did, though actually we didn't move to the Boston area until I was about halfway through high school. Before that, he had actually been a physicist in industry down in outside of Princeton, New Jersey, where I grew up until I was 16. And then he went into academic life.
So when you went to Princeton, it was sort of going home.
It was going home. Yep, I had grown up there and lived there until about my 16th year, and then I came back 18 years later and saw the town from a different perspective.
What attracted you to the field of anthropology?
Well, I think like many college students, what was important to me was meeting one or two very influential and important professors who took an interest in me. I like to talk about the role of mentorship in students' colleges experiences, and I had a couple of, one in particular, very important mentoring experience in college. And I've often thought that if that mentoring and relationship had developed with somebody who had been in the history department, I may well have been a history professor, but it was at Boston College in my junior year. I met a professor of anthropology who took an interest in me, and we understood one another intellectually, and she really was very important in shaping my intellectual interests. I think the other thing about anthropology, it wasn't purely coincidental that I took to anthropology. I think I very early on was attracted to the idea that anthropology had the means of enabling people to see life through the eyes of others, and that the role of anthropology is to enable people to step outside of their own culture, their own cultural presuppositions, and do what they can to imagine what life looks like to somebody who's living life through a different set of cultural presuppositions about the way the world works.
Did you find that the English major and then the sociology concentration was helpful to you?
Yeah, all of that was
together?
somewhat coincidental. I might actually have I might have ended up double majoring in anthropology and English as an undergraduate, but I skipped over the theory and the methodology in the anthropology, because I had already decided by then I was going to go to graduate school and would take those courses anyway. And sociology, there was actually no anthropology department at Boston College. The anthropologist was within the sociology department. So I like to think that English had something to do with my interest in writing and communicating clearly, and I've never stopped having an interest in literature. And in fact, when I teach, as I do at Oberlin, I'll use some literature even in an anthropology course.
Early on, you began working in the field of student personnel.
Yes.
How did that come about?
Almost completely serendipitously. I had intended, I finished a PhD in anthropology. I intended to be a professor of anthropology, and at the time that I was entering the job market, things were very lean for anthropologists. They remain so. I needed to put food on the table, and I finished my graduate work at the University of Chicago, and I needed a job, and there was an opening for an advisor to undergraduates in the College of the University of Chicago, and I took that job without a whole lot of thought about going into student services, and I discovered that I liked it. I discovered that I liked the nature of the problems that I encountered. I liked the fact that the work was very sociable kind of work, that unlike scholarship, which is really a very solitary kind of work, that being in student services means that you're interacting with people, and particularly young people, all the time. I had short-term problems and long-term problems that I solved for students in a few minutes, some in an hour, some problems I worked on for weeks, and some I worked on over the course of months and years. So the work was very appealing, but I fell into it really quite serendipitously, and it's helped me to understand how important it is that anyone thinking about the work world be open to serendipity, that is, open to the possibility that something could come along that they had never thought to explore before. And particularly in working with students as they come into college, I'm particularly enchanted by, and this is quite common at Oberlin, that is students who come in with a set of intellectual interests but are prepared to have those interests take them anywhere. And a student who comes in who intends to use college as a stepping stone to some very particular kind of professional career, I often feel has disregarded the possibility of encountering something they hadn't ever thought of before. The whole accidental process of having your intellect sparked by something you had never thought of before.
What you're really saying is that the arts and sciences, or the liberal arts, are still very valuable as
Absolutely.
areas of study.
Yeah, and in part because they teach you how to learn, and they teach you how to be curious about your world.
Mm-hmm.
They prepare you for a lifetime of being curious about your world.
In my own case, I remember it certainly taught me how much I didn't know.
Yeah, which is important
Which is a good
too.
thing. That was
It is a good thing. It's
challenging
very important to develop the humility and modesty to know that there's an enormous amount that you don't know. It's also important to learn, and I also feel this is a very important part of a liberal arts education, to be open to the possibility that somebody else has a better idea than you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, at the time you were there, and you speak of the college, was that the first 2-year was that when the University of Chicago still had the first 2 years that everybody was in, or something of that sort?
Well, it's, the University of Chicago still had and still has a very substantial core curriculum.
Okay, that's, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. It was an outgrowth of the Hutchins era, I think.
Yes, absolutely. And in the old days, everybody was taking more or less exactly the same curriculum for the first 2 years. There still is a very large core, and there was then as well. But there's a little bit more flexibility in it now. But I think it's still, along with the Great Books program at Columbia and St. John's University, which is also a great books-focused kind of curriculum. It's one of the colleges with the most substantial core curriculum.
Mm-hmm. And let me give you a quote.
Mm-hmm.
Years ago, when I was thinking of making a career in student personnel work, I asked a number of deans who were doing it what the best way was to get into this. And I asked the then Oberlin College dean, a man named Ned Bosworth. He was a marvelous fellow. And he told me that it was his experience that people tended, and his term was, back into it from academic pursuits. And that he really wasn't that impressed with what was then fairly new curriculums to teach one to be a new dean of students or dean of men, dean of women, whatever it might be. And he thought that was the more successful entrance method. So my question, I guess, is what would you say to a student today who might want to be a Peter Goldsmith down the road? How do you go about this?
Well, there was a day when almost any dean of students, by and large, came out of the faculty, and there was a sense that there wasn't anything about being a dean of students that a smart person who was invested in the academic life and knew the classroom couldn't learn in the course of the job. The profession has changed a lot in 30 years, and there's an enormous body of information that you must, in fact, acquire. Increasingly, not surprisingly, given the growing litigiousness of society in general, there's an enormous amount of law related to higher education administration. And it is a challenge to learn to be a dean of students without some rather more specific kind of training. Nonetheless, that's how I came into the profession, and there are lots of people who still do that. Although increasingly the model is that one goes on and does graduate work in higher education administration, and one learns all those things that you might otherwise have to learn on the job. I think it's very important that the profession have both kinds of people coming into it. I will always feel grateful for having come into it as an anthropologist, and at least in some institutions, I think there are real advantages in coming into student services, being firmly grounded in an academic discipline, being in part a scholar, remaining grounded in the classroom, and among other things, it enables the faculty to see in you a peer and somebody that they're prepared to work with as an equal. I think for a young person going into the field, I would encourage them, if they have the intellectual interest in it, I would in fact actually encourage them to consider going through an academic discipline. And if it happens that their career takes them into the classroom, fine. If it happens that it takes them into administration, fine. It gives you a kind of flexibility. Professionals do move in and out of the professoriate and into administration and back again, and sometimes those kinds of careers are very satisfying.
Of course, being in it as you are gives you a certain collegiality with faculty that somebody who had never been in that line of approach, so to speak, would have.
Yeah. And one of the, I think, advantages of that is that I think as the faculty sees it, as I see it myself, I tend never to lose sight of the fact that the primary thing that's going on in a college is the learning that goes on in the classroom. I've never had any doubts about it. I feel strongly that there are important things that students learn outside of the classroom, that if we didn't think there was value added to the things that students do outside of the classroom while at college, then we may as well be a commuter school. But in the end, the thing that you pay your tuition for, the thing that we're really dedicated to, is the education that goes on in the classroom at the hands of the faculty. And nobody in student services should ever set themselves up and the things that they do in competition with the work that the faculty does in the classroom.
Do you ever feel a little bit schizophrenic in this? Moments of tightness, and probably you never have any moments of tightness over in your office. Everything is just calm and serene. So,
yeah, I mean, there are sometimes tensions between the academic realm and the student services realm, but I think they've been fairly minimal at Oberlin in the time that I've been there, and I believe I've helped my college colleagues in student services to see that we are not in competition with the faculty, but we're there to make sure that what goes on outside the classroom fully complements and supports the core teaching mission of the institution.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the needs and the aspirations of students. How do you relate to that sort of thing? I'm putting this in a very broad framework because I'm not quite sure what I mean. I think you can help me on it.
Well, needs
there
and
are
aspirations
needs, there are
of
immediate
students.
needs, and I understand those, and there are aspirations. And sometimes those collide with the institution a little bit.
Right.
I'll open it up to you.
Right. And then there's the other point of tension, which is between what students feel that they need at any given moment and what the institution feels that they need and what's important to them. And those things often coincide, but they don't altogether. Let me talk about a couple of pieces of this. And one is a piece that I think students don't think about a great deal, although they're experiencing it all the time. And that's the fact that at 18 years old, as students enter college, they're about to go through one of the most profound transformations of their entire lives. They've often spent 18 years building up a network of friends and relations, building a community, developing a sense of place. And all of a sudden at age 18, they're in an altogether new environment. They have to invent their social world from the ground up. They have a foot in adolescence and a foot in adulthood. Over the course of 4 years, they need to affect this transition so that by some measure they're prepared to lead their lives independently when they leave college. And it's a huge task. And some students leave their families of origin prepared for that task better than others. But I think we do a real disservice to students as they start college to tell them, as students are often told, these are going to be the best 4 years of your life. I think that's a terrible thing to say to students because it puts a kind of expectation on them that they often can't meet. These are going to be hard years. They're years of transition and enormously hard work and identity formation and figuring out what they want to do with the rest of their lives, what kind of place they're going to hold in the communities that they're about to enter. And then somebody tells them, oh, and by the way, you should be having more fun in these 4 years than for the whole rest of your life. So you arrive at age 22 and you've concluded that, well, that's more fun than I'm ever going to have the rest of my life. So, I guess I'm ready for the serious stuff now. And, to arrive at age 22 and feel that the best years of your life are behind you, I think that's really kind of grim. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's a reasonable expectation to put on students. So, for me, the needs and aspirations have to do with the formation of an adult self. And it has to do with perhaps trying on lots of different versions of oneself, lots of identities, to have the space in which to try on being various people in various communities, to have the freedom to make mistakes and the consequences not be too terribly serious, but also be prepared to go out into the world and not only be an autonomous human being, but also to be ready to accept the fact that life is full of compromises. And you don't always get your own way.
And that raises an interesting thing, because one of the things that makes, I think, to outsiders who are close to the college, somewhat exasperated at times, is that many of the students have very strong opinions on something. Okay. There's no way, you cannot tell them anything else. And you realize that somewhere down the line there's going to be quite a crash with reality, but there's no way you tell them that. And in a way that's refreshing.
Yes.
And in a way it's a little bit disturbing.
Yes.
And I think I see some of these people crusading off in this direction. And I sometimes eavesdrop on conversations if I'm having coffee downtown. And I realize that and I don't mean this to put them down, they really have no idea what they're talking about, but they're having a great experience doing it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's one of the great
learning experience.
It's one of the great luxuries of being in college and a college-age person, is to be able to hold opinions very, very strongly and with great assurance, and being given the space to try those point of views out. And actually, the vast majority of the time, I find Oberlin students extraordinarily well-informed, mm-hmm. with a very good idea of what they're talking about. What I think they're often not prepared for is the reality of working within bureaucracies when they graduate. I think one of the most charming things about working with college students is that they are often so sure about the correctness of their convictions that they believe if only they can get somebody to see the world as they see it, then they'll see that they're right. And it's only a matter of being sufficiently persuasive, and the whole world will be able to see things as they see them. And in some respects, I don't think I want to altogether disabuse students of that. They'll find it out soon enough. In the meantime, they are acquiring skills of persuasion that will suit them very, very well. And, we need to keep in mind also that Oberlin students do often, when they leave college and leave the town of Oberlin, go on to lead lives of great conviction and dedication. And although they sometimes become rather sobered by the realities of compromise and working within bureaucracy, often they find a way of retaining their great idealism about what the world can become. And I think that's one of the things that Oberlin really has to offer to the rest of the world, that view of.
The one thing that I sometimes have thought about, contrasting it back to my college experiences, it seems to me, not just in Oberlin, but in many colleges, the students cut themselves off from dialogues they could be having with very famous people because they wouldn't be willing. For example, I can't imagine President Bush even coming here and getting a cordial reception, and at least people willing to have a give and take with him. I can't imagine what would happen. And that would be true in a lot of, but if you think about it 20 years later, well, gee, I got to be with the President of the United States and talk about some things. And I thought of that with the Secretary of the Treasury, what was it, 2 years ago or whatever. It's just sort of too bad that somehow And it's not, I'm not blaming Oberlin, it's in the culture, the liberal culture of students. If this doesn't agree with me out and at some place,
Yes.
the real world is going to start moving in, and I guess that's a challenge to colleges to try to help make that
I think this is
less rough.
Yeah, I think this is really, for me, is arguably, at least in my line of work, Oberlin's biggest challenge right now is to have students understand that civil discourse does not mean being always polite and withholding your strong convictions, but it means engaging with other people, engaging with people whose ideas may very well be unlike your own, with the willingness to hear what another person has to say, and with the possibility, however remote, that perhaps you could hear something that would cause your mind to be changed. Now, partly I think this is something of a developmental issue. I think when you're trying on these ideas, trying on new ideas about your place in the world, they feel a little bit fragile, and sometimes you're not quite ready to have them challenged. But at some point, if you're really prepared to be engaged in liberal learning, you need to risk putting yourself and your ideas out there and having them challenged, and perhaps challenged by a really smart person who thinks about the world in an entirely different way than you do. And I think civil discourse and being open to ideas unlike your own remains a challenge for Oberlin, though Oberlin's not alone in that. But we need to arrive at a point where there is a place for ideas that aren't popular. I mean, my goodness, that's what Oberlin has been about since its history, a place for ideas that aren't popular, and that needs to include ideas that aren't popular, given the dominating points of view that we often hear at Oberlin.
Well, it's something everybody over there is very much aware of, I'm sure.
We think about all the time. In
Yes.
fact, this was sort of the year of, the 2001-2002 year was the year of civility, in which we had students thinking from orientation on about what civility and civil discourse has meant for our campus and what kinds of responsibilities all of us have had to contribute to civil discourse.
You know, it's amazing. We're out of time.
Oh my goodness.
Will you come back?
All right, I will come
We'll
back.
do round two. We'll do Peter Goldsmith,
I will
part
come back.
2. This was part 1. And we certainly thank you, and I'm just getting into this, so I'm sorry. I'd like to go
Okay.
an hour or more, but we'll do it. We'll just do it in pieces.
Okay,
And,
I will come back.
So I thank you so much
Thanks,
for
Dick. It's good to
round
talk
1,
with
as
you.
we say, and part 1 sounds better than round 1, doesn't it? We'll say part 2 is coming up in April, and we hope you will join us then. In the meantime, I'm Richard Lothrop saying thank you so much for joining us this evening, and I hope you can be with us at the next program. Good evening.
Thanks.